People today might find it hard to imagine a world without smartphones, but in the 1990s, life was vastly different. From calling your friends on a bulky landline to flipping through the physical photo albums, life had its own unique charm. But how did we manage to stay connected and entertained without the latest tech? How did we cope with the absence of instant information and social media updates? Dive into a world where handwritten notes and cassette tapes ruled the day. In the 1990s, landline phones were everywhere in our homes. These classic phones often had rotary dials, which meant turning a dial for each number you wanted to call. It could be a bit slow, especially for long numbers. Plus, these phones were usually big and connected to the wall with a cord, so you had to stay put while chatting. Being tied to a landline meant you had to have conversations in one spot, which could be a hassle if you wanted to move around. But on the flip side, it made phone calls more intentional because you had to stay in one place. The shift began in the late 1990s with the rise of mobile phones. As mobile technology got better and cheaper, people loved the freedom to call from anywhere. By the early 2000s, many started switching from landlines to mobiles. As mobile phones began to replace landlines, the shift in communication technology didn't stop there. What about the devices that helped us send documents? Fax machines were a game changer for sending documents quickly in the 1990s. These nifty devices scanned your papers and sent them over a phone line to another machine that printed them out. It was much faster than mailing documents, making it perfect for contracts, forms, and urgent messages. Whether in offices or homes, the sound of a fax machine connecting was something everyone knew. Using a fax machine was pretty straightforward. You'd feed your document into the machine, dial the recipient's fax number, and wait for the transmission to finish. Sometimes the quality wasn't perfect if the phone line was a bit shaky, but faxing was still seen as high-tech back then. With the advent of email and digital communication in the late 1990s, fax machines started to fade away. Email, now accessible on smartphones, allowed for instant, hassle-free document delivery, and by the early 2000s, many businesses switched to email, making fax machines less common. This shift was further amplified by the convenience of having email available everywhere we go. As fax machines faded with the rise of email, did other technologies also shift our entertainment habits? Before smartphones, TV was the heart of home entertainment. Families huddled around their sets to enjoy popular shows, news, and movies. With only a few channels available, everyone often tuned into the same programs, creating shared moments and memories. Missing a show meant patiently waiting for a rerun. The VCR, introduced in the 70s and booming in the 80s and 90s, was a game changer. It let people record their favorite shows and movies on VHS tapes to watch later. This freedom from strict TV schedules was exciting. Recording shows and renting movies became the norm. However, mastering the VCR involved some skills, like setting the timer and managing tape jams. By the late 90s, DVDs and digital recording took over, offering better quality and ease. By the early 2000s, DVDs had mostly replaced VCRs in homes, and now, watching movies and TV on smartphones has become the norm. As we look back at the impact of VCRs, how did the rise of video game consoles change our home environment? In the 1990s, gaming soared to new heights with the Nintendo 64 and PlayStation. The Nintendo 64, debuting in 1996, wowed gamers with its 3D graphics and classics like Super Mario 64 and The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. Sony's PlayStation, which arrived in 1994, made a huge splash with hits like Final Fantasy VII and Metal Gear Solid. These consoles transformed living rooms into exciting game hubs, where players connected controllers and played on TV screens. While today's mobile and online gaming lets us play anywhere, 90s gaming was all about friends gathering for fun multiplayer sessions. By the early 2000s, as newer consoles like the PlayStation 2 and Xbox took over, games like Grand Theft Auto 3 and Halo became iconic, setting new standards in the gaming industry. As we reflect on the iconic 90s gaming era, how did the shift to digital impact our access to information? To access information in the 1990s, libraries and encyclopedias were essential for research and learning. Libraries were like treasure chests, full of books, journals, and reference materials that students and researchers spent hours exploring. Encyclopedias like the well-known Encyclopedia Britannica were packed with information on countless topics and were commonly found in homes and schools. Using them took patience and effort, as finding specific information meant diving through card catalogs and indexes, but it encouraged thorough research and critical thinking. Newspapers and magazines were also crucial in the 90s for staying updated on news and entertainment. People eagerly awaited their daily newspapers and magazine subscriptions, which delivered the latest on everything from current events to fashion. But with the arrival of digital news and online magazines, we now get instant notification about news through different apps, leading to a decline of print media. As print media's influence declined, how did people maintain their social connections in an increasingly digital world? In the 1990s, people thrived on face-to-face communication, meeting up for chats, gatherings, and events. Social plans were made through phone calls or in-person visits, and invitations arrived by mail or were hand-delivered. Popular spots to hang out included cafes, parks, and homes. Without smartphones, folks were punctual and dedicated to their plans, which strengthened personal connections and community bonds. Written correspondence was also a big deal. Letters and postcards kept friends and families in touch, involving choosing decorative paper, writing heartfelt notes, and mailing them at the post office. Getting a letter was thrilling and eagerly awaited. Though it took longer than today's instant messaging, it gave communication a warm, personal touch. But as email and mobile phones emerged in the late 90s, written correspondence began to fade. As we look back at how communication evolved from heartfelt letters to the digital age, can you imagine navigating without GPS? Back in the 90s, people used paper maps and atlases for travel and navigation, and it was quite an adventure. These maps were essential for planning road trips and finding your way around. Without GPS, travelers had to unfold big maps, plot their routes, and sometimes get a bit lost. They kept atlases handy in their cars, using landmarks and road signs to guide them. It required skill and a sense of adventure. With the rise of smart navigation systems that avoid traffic and provide fastest routes in the early 2000s, paper maps began to fade in popularity, but many still enjoy their nostalgic charm. Similarly, in the 90s, travel agencies were key for planning vacations. People visited them to book flights, hotels, and tours, with agents handling the details. The internet would later change this, but some still love the personal touch of a travel agent. Back in the 90s, maps and travel agencies shaped our journeys, but as technology evolved, how did our shopping habits change? In the 1990s, shopping in physical stores was a fun and popular activity. People loved visiting brick-and-mortar stores to check out and buy products. The stores were designed with eye-catching displays and neatly arranged aisles to draw customers in. Shoppers enjoyed the hands-on experience of touching and trying items before making a purchase. However, with the rise of online shopping in the 2000s, physical stores started to decline. Despite this shift, many people still fondly remember the charm of in-person shopping. Catalog shopping was also big back then. People would use mail-order catalogs to buy everything from clothes to gadgets right from their homes. They'd fill out a form and send it off with a check or money order, eagerly awaiting their package. Catalogs became less popular with the rise of shopping on smartphones and social media, but the excitement of waiting for a delivery is still a cherished memory. As online shopping took over, how did emergency services adapt to the rise of mobile phones and the internet? In the 1990s, staying safe meant relying on fixed emergency contacts, like 911 in the US, but today, some phones can automatically call 911 if they detect an accident. People learned how to dial these numbers through public awareness campaigns, including kids. With no mobile phones, emergencies were handled using landlines or payphones. People either memorized key numbers or kept them written down. It was a system that worked, but it required quick thinking and easy access to a phone. During emergencies, getting real-time info was tricky since there was no internet or smartphones. People depended on radio, TV, and word of mouth for updates, which sometimes meant delays or incomplete information. For natural disasters, locals once turned to news stations for instructions. Today, we get push notifications on our phones, which provide faster and more reliable information. With the rise of mobile phones and the internet in the late 1990s, how did this technology transform personal organization? Daily planners and calendars have been around since the 18th century, but they rarely become a staple in the 90s. People used them to keep track of appointments, birthdays, and events, jotting down tasks and checking them off. It took a bit of discipline and regular updates, but it was a great way to stay organized. As technology advanced in the early 2000s with PDAs and smartphones, paper planners began to fade. Yet many still love the feel of paper and the joy of crossing off completed tasks. Similarly, physical address books were a must-have in the 90s for storing contact details. People cherished updating these handwritten books, but as mobile phones and digital contacts took over, these old-school address books became less common. As paper planners and address books gave way to digital solutions, did the office tech of the 90s keep up with these changes? Offices were bustling with typewriters, fax machines, and early computers in the 90s. Typewriters, a staple since the 19th century, were still popular for typing up documents. Fax machines, which took off in the 1980s, were the go-to for quickly sending documents over the phone lines. Early computers, though big and slow, began to replace typewriters for word processing and data management. With no mobile tech, work was quite stationary, as employees had to stay at their desks to get information or talk to colleagues. By the late 1990s, personal computers and email started phasing out typewriters and fax machines. Interestingly, some writers still love typewriters for their unique feel and simplicity. Before digital automation, data entry was all manual, slow, and error-prone. As we've seen, life in the 1990s was a simpler yet surprisingly vibrant time before smartphones. How do you think life would be different today without our modern tech? Jot your thoughts down in the comments section below. The Modern Way. If you enjoyed this trip down memory lane, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more nostalgic content.